My name is Lyra Ashton, and for as long as I can remember, my life has been a quiet negotiation with the spaces others leave unfilled. I suppose you could say I was born with an old soul, content in the hushed corners of rooms, listening more than speaking, observing the delicate dance of light and shadow on the world around me. My childhood home, Seaview Manor, perched on the cliffs overlooking Port Blossom Bay, was grand and filled with the scent of sea salt and my mother's meticulously tended roses, but I often found my truest solace in the small, sun-drenched attic, lost in books or sketching the gulls that wheeled against the vast, expressive sky. I hadn't heard my father's voice in 18 months. This morning, it came through static. The voicemail was short, blunt, even for him. "It's about your sister. She's gone." That was all. No hello, no explanation, not even my name. Just that one sentence, like a rock dropped in still water. There were 14 missed calls, 11 from my mother, Beatrice, 2 from Serafina, 1 from the man who hadn't looked me in the eye the night I left, my father, Julian. I didn't answer any of them. I played the voicemail once, then once more, softer, as if the words might change if I gave them space. They didn't. My phone lay on the small, scarred oak table in my cottage studio, its screen still glowing faintly. I stood there, cocooned by the comforting scent of old paper and dried lavender from the previous tenant, the quiet hum of the old building settling around me. My studio is tucked behind the Reading Nook, the oldest bookshop in Port Blossom, where I've found a measure of peace sorting through stories that are not my own. Morning light, filtered through the ivy that crawls up the window panes, painted soft stripes across the worn wooden floor, illuminating a half-finished cup of chamomile tea. It was the kind of silence that feels ancient, the kind that holds forgotten whispers. I didn't move, not right away. I thought about Beatrice, my mother. A woman of impeccable taste and unshakable composure who could arrange flowers into breathtaking sculptures, but whose heart, I often felt, was arranged with similar, untouchable precision. She hadn't spoken to me directly since the day I voiced a truth she found too discordant for the family symphony. She would be, I imagined, gliding through Seaview Manor's polished rooms, her worry a tightly coiled spring beneath her serene facade, already strategizing how to restore the family's flawless public image before the seaside town's gentle gossips noticed a hairline crack. I pictured Serafina too, my older sister, a whirlwind of bright colors and infectious laughter, always so adept at weaving narratives that placed her in the most flattering light, even when the threads were unraveling. Maybe she had drifted away on one of her impulsive adventures. Maybe this time, the carefully constructed charm had fractured beyond repair. But none of that explained the sudden barrage of calls. Because when I walked away from their carefully curated world, they had sealed the door behind me, leaving no latch for a return. No calls to see if my little studio was warm enough, no inquiries about my well-being, not even a card on my birthday, which had passed twice in that quiet expanse of time. And now, after all that deliberate silence, 14 calls before the town clock had even chimed 9. I reached for my phone again, my fingers hesitating over the cool glass. I saw my own reflection in the dark screen, eyes that held a familiar weariness, a trace of the sea's gray in their depths. My hair, the color of driftwood, was simply plaited, a style born of ease rather than vanity. Beatrice used to insist on elaborate updos for family gatherings, telling me it added presence. I learned early that presence, in her lexicon, meant blending seamlessly into the background she designed. The phone pulsed with another incoming call, my mother's name flashing briefly. I let it ring, the sound an unwelcome intrusion into the morning's calm. I wasn't ready to hear what they needed, not when they had never once inquired about what I had lost, or what, perhaps, I had found in its place. It had been a late summer afternoon, the air thick with the scent of honeysuckle and distant rain. The lawn at Seaview Manor sloped towards the sea, and my mother had arranged for tea on the terrace. The fine porcelain, patterned with tiny blue forget-me-nots, was laid out on a lace-covered table. Scones still warm, nestled in a linen-lined basket. Serafina had chosen the blend of Earl Grey, her favorite. She always said the small details were what elevated an occasion. I arrived punctually, a habit ingrained since childhood. Beatrice, my mother, wore a dress the color of lavender, a single strand of pearls her only adornment. She greeted me with a cool kiss on the cheek, her eyes already scanning the horizon as if expecting a squall. "The cream is a little thin today," she remarked, though it looked perfectly rich to me. Julian, my father, was standing by the balustrade, gazing out at the restless waves, his hands clasped behind his back. He offered a faint smile when I joined him, but his eyes seemed to focus on something far beyond me. Serafina arrived last, as always, a vision in sunshine yellow, her laughter like wind chimes, her eyes bright with a practiced, innocent sparkle. We settled into the wicker chairs. There was a performance of normalcy, inquiries about the bookshop, the turning of the season, a benign comment about the mayor's new initiative for the harbor. Then Beatrice placed her teacup carefully in its saucer, the clink unnaturally loud in the waiting air. "I understand," she began, her voice as smooth and cool as the sea glass I used to collect on the beach, "that you've been looking into things at Bloom and Thorn." No one needed to ask what things she meant. I had found the discrepancies 3 weeks prior. Not in complex spreadsheets, but in the heart of what Bloom and Thorn Legacy Goods was supposed to represent. Mismatched orders from our most treasured silversmith, invoices for rare pigments that never arrived in the pottery studio, whispers from a usually stoic weaver about designs being subtly altered, simplified, to cut costs after they left her hands. The worst had been the discovery of a hidden catalog from an overseas supplier, offering replicas of our signature heirloom lace linens, identical in pattern but made with inferior thread at a fraction of the cost. The paper trail, when I gently unspooled it, led not to a faceless corporation, but to a series of discreet payments authorized by Serafina. She wasn't just cutting corners, she was hollowing out the soul of the business my grandfather had built on integrity and genuine craftsmanship. I hadn't gone to our small board of local investors. I hadn't even confronted Serafina directly, fearing her tears and deflections. I had brought my carefully compiled notes, a small, unassuming journal filled with my observations, to my mother. I believed, with a daughter's fading hope, that Beatrice, the guardian of our family's heritage, would want to mend the tear quietly, to protect the legacy, to guide Serafina back. Instead, she had arranged this garden tea. "I understand," she said again, her gaze unwavering, "and I need to ask you, Lyra, what you imagined the outcome of this scrutiny would be." Serafina stirred her tea, a tiny frown appearing on her brow, as if she were the one being inconvenienced. Father turned to look at a passing sailboat, his shoulders set in a way that spoke of retreat. I tried to keep my voice even, a soft echo against the vastness of the sea. "I didn't intend to cause distress. I just thought we should be aware, to ensure the quality, the promise we make to people." "No," Beatrice interrupted, her voice still low, but with an edge like fine steel. "You didn't intend to cause distress yet." She smoothed an imaginary wrinkle from the tablecloth. "Do you have any comprehension, Lyra, of what such accusations, however quietly voiced, could do to your father's standing in this community? To Serafina's burgeoning reputation? To this family?" She looked at me then, not with anger or even overt disappointment, but with a clinical assessment that chilled me more than any rage. Serafina sniffled delicately, dabbing at the corner of her eye with a lace-edged handkerchief. She didn't need to speak. Mother's words were her shield and sword. "I wasn't trying to expose anyone," I whispered, the salt spray suddenly feeling cold on my skin. "I just wanted to protect what grandfather built." "You just made your sister feel undermined and attacked," Beatrice countered, her tone irrefutable. "That was never my intention. But it was the consequence, Lyra. Intentions are ether. Consequences are stone." I looked at my father, a silent plea in my eyes. He was studying the intricate knot of a ship far out at sea as if it held the answers to the universe. He didn't speak. He didn't meet my gaze. The silence on the terrace was profound, broken only by the sigh of the wind through the cypress trees and the distant cry of a gull. Then Beatrice delivered the words that would echo in the quietest hours of my nights for months to come. If you cannot keep this matter within the heart of this family, Lyra, then you are choosing to stand outside it. I didn't weep. I didn't argue. I didn't offer further explanations that would only fall on deaf ears. I carefully folded my linen napkin, placed it beside my untouched scone, and rose from my chair. No one moved to stop me. No one called my name. I walked back through the house, past the grandfather clock in the hall whose steady tick-tock had measured out so much of my young life, and out the heavy oak front door, the one with the brass dolphin knocker I used to polish with lemon oil and soft cloths. I heard the latch click softly behind me. That was all. That was the last time I saw the inside of Seaview Manor, not because I was banished by decree, but because I finally understood that the space I had tried to carve for myself within its walls had always been conditional, an illusion I could no longer sustain. Before that garden tea, before the gentle unfolding of deceit, before my name became a hushed word in my own family home, there were years of trying. Not just trying to be good or trying to be helpful, but trying to be seen for who I was, not who they needed me to be. I was the one who remembered the birthdays of our elderly artisans, sending small, thoughtful gifts. I was the one who spent hours in the dusty archives, tracing the history of a particular weaving technique or a forgotten ceramic glaze, because I believed those stories were the true gold of Bloom and Thorne. When Father had his bout of debilitating vertigo a few years back, it was I who quietly managed his correspondence and ensured his favorite books were by his bedside, even though Serafina was officially his personal assistant that summer. He never said thank you directly, but once he patted my hand and murmured, "You have a good heart, Lyra," a rare gem of acknowledgement I hoarded for years. I replanted Mother's rose garden every few springs, carefully tending the delicate roots, because no one else had the patience. I often curated the displays in our small downtown Port Blossom showroom, arranging items not just for aesthetic appeal, but to tell a story of craftsmanship, of human hands and dedicated hearts. Mother would glance at them, offer a clipped, adequate, Lyra, and then allow Serafina to add a flamboyant, oversized bow or a glittering, incongruous accessory that, to my eyes, detracted from the quiet beauty I'd tried to showcase. Serafina rarely delved into the details of the business. She was the bright, charming face, hosting trunk shows, dazzling potential clients with her vivacity and tales of discovering exquisite treasures, many of which I had sourced. She would sweep into the office late, smelling of expensive perfume and coffee from the artisan bakery, bestowing airy kisses and leaving a trail of charming chaos for me to discreetly tidy. I usually stayed late, ensuring the orders were correct, the ledgers balanced, while their laughter drifted from the more opulent front offices. When Serafina's prized Persian cat, Moonbeam, fell ill, I was the one who rushed him to the vet in the next town, stayed up through the night administering medication, because Serafina had a terribly important charity gala she couldn't possibly miss. She'd returned the next afternoon, full of apologies and dramatic sighs about her exhausting but utterly vital evening. "You're an angel, Lyra, truly," she'd said, stroking Moonbeam's fur. "I don't know what I'd do without you." The words, though seemingly kind, felt like another silken thread in the web of expectation of my designated role as the quiet, reliable support system. I sometimes wondered if she, or any of them, truly saw the person behind the role. Bloom and Thorne Legacy Goods. It was meant to be our shared inheritance. Grandfather William Bloom had started it with a small loan and a profound respect for the traditional crafts of our coastal region. "This isn't just about selling things, girls," he used to tell Serafina and me, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "It's about preserving beauty, honoring skill, connecting people to things made with soul." But when I suggested a workshop series to connect customers with the artisans, I was told it was not financially viable. When I proposed a more transparent sourcing policy, showcasing the stories of each craftsperson, it was deemed unnecessarily complex. Serafina once convinced Mother to invest a substantial sum in a glossy rebranding campaign featuring celebrity endorsements, completely missing the quiet authenticity that was the company's true strength. No one asked for my opinion. They just asked me to process the invoices for the campaign, my heart sinking as I saw the figures. I was the one who knew the artisans by name, who understood the nuances of their crafts, who stayed late during the winter storms to ensure the kills were safe. And still, I was always gently steered towards the ledgers, the inventory, the back-end details, because Serafina, they said, had the natural flair for the public-facing side. Do the work be dependable, remain unobtrusive? That was the unspoken contract, except for one small, almost forgotten moment. One blustery November evening, I had stayed late to help Mrs. Finch, our elderly lacemaker, carefully pack a delicate wedding veil. The showroom was dark, the streetlights casting long shadows. My fingers were cold, and I was weary. As I was locking up, a woman I vaguely recognized as a new cleaner for the building, a quiet woman named Martha, paused with her bucket and mop. She looked at me, her gaze surprisingly direct. "You're the one who tends to the quiet things, aren't you?" she said, her voice soft. That was all. No grand praise, no official recognition. Just those few words, spoken with a simple understanding. And I remember them still, with a clarity that surprises me. Because if Martha, a near stranger, could see that small, persistent light in me, why couldn't my own family? It began with a subtle dissonance, a note slightly off-key in the familiar melody of Bloom and Thorn. An invoice from a renowned glassblower for a series of bespoke vases, but the vases that arrived felt thinner, their colors less vibrant than his usual masterful work. I cross-referenced it with an old catalog. The signature was slightly different. Then, a complaint from a discerning customer about a hand-stitched quilt that showed signs of machine work upon closer inspection. Serafina had brushed it off as a misunderstanding, charming the customer with a discount on her next purchase. But I couldn't brush it off. I started looking more closely, comparing supplier manifests with actual inventory. Noticing small, recurring payments to newly established artisan collectives whose addresses led to mail drops or vacant storefronts. The final, heart-wrenching piece was finding a hidden compartment in Serafina's antique writing desk at the office. Inside, nestled amongst scented stationery, were order forms from a large-scale import company, offering meticulously crafted replicas of some of our most iconic Bloom and Thorn designs. From hand-painted ceramics to intricately carved wooden music boxes. The signatures authorizing these bulk purchases, the ones that arranged for these soulless copies to be subtly integrated into our legacy stock, were undeniably Serafina's. She wasn't just being careless, she was systematically replacing authenticity with artifice, pocketing the considerable profits. I gathered copies of the crucial documents, the replica order forms, the invoices from the phantom artisan collectives, photographs comparing the genuine articles with their cheaper imposters. I laid them out on my small desk in the back office, the one that overlooked a brick wall, and traced the connections with a heavy heart. I didn't sleep for 2 nights, the betrayal a cold stone in my chest. By the 3rd morning, a fragile resolution had formed. Not to expose her publicly, not to create a scandal that would tarnish my grandfather's name, but to tell my mother. I still clung to the belief that Beatrice, with her fierce pride in the Bloom and Thorn heritage, would want to staunch the wound, to quietly restore integrity. I was so profoundly mistaken. When I presented my findings to her, not in accusation but in quiet concern, laying the small journal of notes on her polished mahogany desk in the study at Seaview Manor, she didn't open it. She listened, her expression unreadable, her hands perfectly still in her lap. When I finished, a long silence stretched, filled only by the distant chime of the ship's clock on the mantel. "Then," she said, her voice devoid of warmth, "we will handle this, Lyra." That was all. No questions about the evidence, no denial of Serafina's involvement, no shared sorrow for the compromised legacy. Just that definitive, closing statement. I left the journal on her desk. I never knew if she even turned a single page. The following Monday, I arrived at the Bloom and Thorne showroom. My key, usually smooth in the lock, met resistance. I tried again. It wouldn't turn. Confused, I walked around to the staff entrance, where Mr. Davies, the usually jovial caretaker, avoided my eyes and mumbled something about new security protocols. My computer login failed. User not recognized. My carefully curated collection of antique thimbles, which I kept on a small shelf by my desk, was gone. In its place was a generic plastic pen holder. A new young woman, bright and efficient, was seated at Serafina's old assistant's desk, and she smiled politely, asking if I had an appointment. No one from management spoke to me. Not my father, not Serafina, not even a letter from HR. They didn't fire me. They simply, quietly, erased my presence, like a pencil sketch deemed unworthy of ink. I walked out, the salt wind stinging my eyes, leaving behind the scent of beeswax and old wood, and the faint, lingering hope that had finally, irrevocably, died. That evening, I sat in my small rented room above the bakery, my first refuge, and waited. Not for an apology, I knew better than that. But perhaps for an explanation, a word. My phone remained silent. No missed calls, no messages. Just the echo of their collective decision. I kept the copies of those damning documents, not with any intention of future retribution. The thought of public disgrace, even for Serafina, made me feel ill. I kept them as a tangible reminder. Proof, not for a court, but for myself. Because when the people who are supposed to hold your story decide to edit you out, it helps to have something solid in your hands. Something that whispers, you were there. You saw the truth. You were not the one who was wrong. The silence from Seaview Manor wasn't a void, it was a carefully constructed wall. It grew, not brick by brick, but breath by breath, with every unanswered query in my heart, every unacknowledged milestone. I soon moved from the room above the bakery to the little cottage studio behind the reading nook. It was smaller, quieter, filled with the gentle rustle of turning pages and the distant murmur of the sea. Mr. Silas Croft, the bookshop's owner, a kind man with eyes as old as the rarest first edition, asked few questions and offered me part-time work cataloging his endless, wonderful acquisitions. My phone learned a new stillness. The only regular intrusions were notifications from the library about overdue books or emails advertising art supplies. No birthdays were forgotten, because mine was no longer marked on their calendar. No holidays were strained, because I was no longer on the guest list. Just a clean, uninterrupted quiet, like the surface of a deep, undisturbed pool. I found a rhythm in the quiet. Shelves to organize, bindings to gently mend, the unique scent of each old book a small discovery. I learned the names of forgotten authors, the histories of different paper stocks. There was a profound comfort in things that held their stories patiently, without agenda. Every evening I brewed jasmine tea, a habit from my grandfather. I still sketched sometimes small, intricate drawings of seashells or the patterns of light on my windowsill, as if for an audience that might one day appear. No one ever did. Serafina's silk shawl, a vibrant turquoise shot through with gold thread, the one she'd accidentally left at my old apartment months before the garden tea, still lay folded in a cedar box under my bed. I'd meant to return it countless times. Once I'd even found a suitable gift box, tied it with a simple cream ribbon. I'd picked up my phone, scrolled to her name, my thumb hovering over the call icon. And then I'd put the phone down. The shawl remained in its box. Serafina had a dozen others just like it. She wouldn't miss this one. Perhaps that thought made it easier, for a time, to hold on to that last, silken thread of connection, however frayed. There were moments, of course. Unexpected ambushes of memory. Reading a review of a new artist whose work father would have admired, his quiet enthusiasm a rare but cherished thing. Passing the little stone church where mother arranged the altar flowers every Easter, the scent of lilies suddenly sharp and poignant. But each time, the impulse to reach out would founder on the memory of that unyielding lock, the blank computer screen, the cool, dismissive finality in Beatrice's voice. That kind of silence isn't accidental. It's an architecture. And they had built theirs with formidable skill. One evening, as I was watering the small rosemary plant on my windowsill, the window opened to the cool night air, I heard familiar voices drifting up from the cobbled lane. 2 junior associates from Bloom and Thorne, their laughter bright and carefree, discussing a recent successful auction. They sounded happy, prosperous, as if the world, their world, hadn't skipped a beat. I felt a flicker, not of anger, not even sadness anymore. Just a quiet, steady acknowledgement. They had moved on. And so, in my own way, had I. The difference was, I hadn't pretended nothing was broken. I had simply stopped waiting for someone else to pick up the pieces. I woke this morning to the sun painting familiar patterns across my floorboards, the light catching the tiny imperfections in the old glass of my window. The kettle whistled its cheerful tune. I steeped my tea, sat at the small oak table, the scent of chamomile a gentle comfort. I scrolled through the usual morning emails, a newsletter from a local pottery guild, a reminder from Mr. Croft about a shipment of rare maps, digital clutter. And then I saw them, 14 missed calls. 11 from Beatrice. 2 from Serafina. 1 from Julian. My breath didn't catch. My heart didn't lurch. It was more like an old, familiar ache stirring in a joint long thought healed, a dull throb, a memory of pain, but no longer acute. I waited, letting the steam from my tea curl and dissipate before I pressed play on the voicemail. It's about your sister. She's gone. Julian's voice was thin, almost reedy, stripped of its usual subtle timbre. Gone. Such a small, devastating word. Not missing, which implies a search, a hope. Not taken ill, which suggests care and concern. Just gone. I replayed it, leaning against the worn counter, watching the last of the steam vanish from my mug like a departing spirit. What shade of gone did he mean? Serafina had a talent for disappearing acts, sudden trips to secluded spas, artistic retreats to remote islands, dalliances with charming but unsuitable men who whisked her away for weeks at a time. But this message wasn't from a concerned friend. It was from them. From the family who had meticulously excised me from their narrative, their business, their lives. And now, after 18 months of resounding silence, they needed something. Not me, not Lyra, but something I could perhaps provide. I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that this was not an olive branch. Not an invitation to reconnect, to heal, to be understood. I glanced at the cedar box under my bed, where Serafina's turquoise shawl still lay. For a fleeting moment, I imagined taking it out, smoothing its silken folds, perhaps even taking it to Seaview Manor. A gesture. But I didn't move. I understood the chasm between needing a person and needing a problem solved. They hadn't called because my absence had finally registered as a loss. They called because the person they had insulated from all consequence had, it seemed, finally spun beyond their control, and for the first time, there was no quiet, reliable Lyra to absorb the impact or discreetly sweep away the debris. I finished my tea, the last sip cool on my tongue. I let the voicemail icon blink on my phone for another minute, a tiny, insistent pulse in the quiet room. Then, with a steadiness that surprised even myself, I pressed delete. The message vanished, the screen returning to its placid darkness, as if their names had never illuminated it at all. I made another cup of tea, just for the warmth it offered my hands. The mug left a faint, pearly ring on the oak table. I wiped it away with the edge of my sleeve. Then, I walked to the old pine chest where I kept things I hadn't fully unpacked, remnants of a life I no longer lived. Inside, Beneath a stack of grandfather's old sketchbooks was a simple linen-covered portfolio. Within it, still crisp and ordered, were the documents, Serafina's altered invoices, the photographs of the replica goods, the notes I had made in my small, neat hand, detailing the slow erosion of integrity at Bloom and Thorn. For 18 months, I had kept them. Not as a weapon, not as a threat, but as an anchor to my own truth, a shield against the insidious whisper that perhaps I had been the one to misunderstand, to misinterpret, to break faith. I drew them out, the paper cool beneath my fingertips. I looked at them one last time, not with anger or even sorrow, but with a kind of detached clarity. They were pages from a story that was no longer mine to carry. One by one, I fed them into the small, hand-cranked paper shredder Mr. Croft kept for sensitive documents in the bookshop's back office, which he allowed me to use. The soft whirring of the blades, the gentle tearing, was the only sound in the room, a quiet dismantling. When the last page was gone, reduced to a pile of meaningless ribbons, I ran my hand over the now empty portfolio. I folded it carefully and placed it in the recycling bin. Not because they deserved my silence or the destruction of the proof of their choices, but because I no longer needed to carry the weight of their secrets to validate my own. Next, I picked up my phone. I found Serafina's number first, then Beatrice's, then Julian's. The screen prompted me each time, "Are you sure you want to block this contact?" My finger, steady and resolute, tapped yes. 3 times. Each press was as calm and deliberate as pouring water into a glass. No surge of triumph, no bitter satisfaction. Just a quiet click, the sound of a door being gently but firmly closed. Outside, the wind had picked up, whispering through the ivy, rattling the old window panes in a familiar late-autumn lament. I retrieved the cedar box from under my bed. I lifted out Serafina's turquoise shawl. The silk still shimmered, but it smelled faintly of cedar and disuse. I folded it neatly, without sentiment, and placed it in the donation box just inside the door of the reading nook, the one Mr. Croft kept for local charities. No note. Let someone else find warmth, or beauty, or perhaps just a splash of unexpected color in what was never truly mine to hold. By noon, the cottage studio felt different. Lighter. The quiet was no longer a consequence of their silence, but a sanctuary of my own making. They could keep Seaview Manor, the Bloom and Thorn name, the carefully polished version of events they would undoubtedly present to Port Blossom. They could spin whatever narrative they chose. But narratives are fragile things. They need all their characters to stand, to play their assigned roles. And I had, at long last, stepped out of their frame, not with a dramatic exit, but with a quiet refusal to re-enter on their terms. I did not leave in anger. I simply stayed in my quiet until the quiet became my strength. And that quiet, I've come to understand, is not an absence. It is a presence. It is the gentle assertion of self, the unshakable boundary, the dignity of choosing not to explain, not to engage, not to be drawn back into a play where my only role was to be diminished. They might tell the story differently now. They might say I was too sensitive, too unforgiving. They might say I abandoned them. But stories change depending on who is holding the pen. And I had finally taken back my own. If silence ever cost you everything, just leave a dot. A full stop. The quiet, unshakable end of a sentence you no longer need to complete for anyone but yourself.